You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos Stilianessis.
Welcome back, everybody, to Here for the Truth. My name is Yerasimos.
I'm Joel.
We got Joel, and we have a really special guest for y'all today, Kim Anami. So happy to have her here. And I just want to read a little bit about Kim here in her bio, and then we'll get into it. So Kim is here to infuse more passion into your life and bed. She is a holistic sex and relationship coach, writer, and speaker. Her work is a spiritual synthesis of over 2 decades of Tantra, Taoism, transpersonal psychology, philosophy, and a host of quantum growth accelerating practices she uses to propel clients into higher stratospheres of connection, intimacy, energy, and creativity. Her musings on life and love have graced Playboy, Elle, Marie Claire, Shape, the Sunday Times UK, the Daily Mail, GQ, and national talk shows from E! Network to CNN and NPR, and now on Here for the Truth.
Yes.
She divides her time between Bali and Los Angeles and a host of beaches in between, where she not only lives and surfs, but lifts objects with her vagina. You can follow her globetrotting and weightlifting vagina and adventures on Instagram with the hashtag things I lift with my vagina, her sex education videos on YouTube, her podcast Orgasmic Enlightenment, and you can check her out online for all things intimacy programs at www.kimanami.com.
Yeah.
Welcome, Kim.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I guess we want to start things off with just the topic of sexuality in general. Like, how has sex been distorted through the times, and how has it impacted us today in our relationships, in our sense of self, etc.?
Well, I would say that sex is really the original psy-op, meaning it is one of the biggest lies and delusions that's purported to people all over the world from birth, right? Or even in the creation stories in different religions. Like, that was the event that wrecked everything. And nothing could be further from the actual truth, where my view and experience and what I teach is that sexual energy is life force energy. This is the energy that creates new life. And if we're not creating babies with it, we can be taking that energy and consciously using it, generating power with it, and then infusing that into everything that we do, where we are creating our own reality with this energy. It's the ultimate free energy source. And yet, all of the programming and the brainwashing around sex is that it's dirty, it's bad, it's taboo, it's just something that married people kind of do, rather than it being this access point to other dimensions of consciousness, to higher dimensions of awareness. And that's how my early experiences of sex really showed me that. Before I read anything about it or like knew anything externally from external sources about it, it was my own experiences feeling like this portal opened up within me, and that I had access to these higher places in myself. And it actually helped me to self-realize. I became the best version of myself after having these cataclysmic sexual encounters, where all of my conditioning and layers of programming would fall away, and I would emerge as this more pure vehicle of who I really am. So that was my pathway into really pursuing sex as a conscious growth modality, right? Like, I meditate, I eat well. To me, sex is in that whole genre of things that we do to become our best selves if we're using it consciously. And I think that's why there is such an orchestrated effort for people to be unconscious around sex, where we deliberately traumatize people around sex, whether it's circumcising male infants at birth, or deliberate when people invade countries, they go in and they rape and they plunder. The sexual abuse, the systematic sexual abuse that happened when Catholics invaded other countries and they went in and immediately, went at the children. Like, these are deliberate ways to taint the life force energy of entire cultures. It's deliberate, right? And so my work is all about removing these false ideas, the trauma, the programming that's been layered on top of people's pure sexual energy that we all have access to, right? There's something that I talk about called the Anami guarantee, which is that all people can, right? A lot of conventional doctors or maybe typical sex teachers will be like, well, some people can have G-spot orgasms, but some people can't. But don't you worry, if you can't, it's still okay, right? This sort of patronizing, everyone gets a participation trophy thing that I think is really quite embarrassing for those people, because the truth is that everyone can, right? Every woman can have G-spot, cervical, ejaculating orgasms that hit the roof. Every woman has a high ravenous libido and can shoot ping pong balls with her vagina. Every man can have multiple orgasms and have sex for 8 hours straight, learn how to separate orgasm from ejaculation. All they need are the right tools, or to remove over, these layers of lies that have been put upon them, and then reveal what's really underneath, which is this innate power that we all have.
I love it. That's just resonating on so many levels. And I mean, it's so true. Even like the origin story of creation, like the Garden of Eden, like at the base of all our psyches is this innate distortion view of sex as this thing that's, kind of the reason why evil has proliferated in some kind of way. And for the most part, unless you're diving into these topics in a real conscious way, you spend your whole life kind of tacitly not wanting to go there in terms of what sex really is and how empowering it can possibly be. So yeah, I just want to say that I love everything you said. Just then, I'm looking forward to what's to come here. Yerasimos.
Yeah, what I just wanted to say, just because you brought up a subject that I've spoken about, and it has impacted me greatly, but even just the subject of circumcision, like what we do to baby boys in this country primarily. Obviously there's other parts of the world as well, but for a large percentage of the world, that's not a practice that is, like, if I was born in Greece, I would be intact, but I wasn't, so I'm not. And it's just something that I'm curious about with your work, because I agree with you, like, it doesn't matter where you are, what's happened to you, you can still have these experiences. But what have you noticed working with men that are intact versus men that aren't, and how has that impacted their sense of self, their intimacy, their relationship with their penis? Like, I'm just curious your thoughts, because you've worked with so many people, and I love your honest assessment of like what's different, and what have people who have been circumcised, do they have to work through?
I think it's massive, right? And you still have to get through this idea, like the argument of, is it really, a bad thing, right? Because most people will defend it and be like, well, it's for hygiene, or it's or because my dad, want my son to look like me. Yeah. It's like this stuff, right, that you have to bust through. I would say, I love your mug. That's awesome. I would say that,
it's subconscious programming. Okay. We're here for the truth.
Of the right kind. That's awesome. So I would say that men who have been circumcised, I would say, have a predisposition towards premature ejaculation, first of all, because there's this sense of like wanting to get it over with really fast, right? So to me, premature ejaculation is a symptom of avoiding intimacy, because it can be absolutely under a man's control to extend his period of whatever sexual performance, but it's something that they're just defaulting to, is this unconscious urge to just shut down, right? Because you can't go deep. You can't go deep in yourself. You can't go deep with a woman if you're bailing. And the stats are appalling, right? 75% of men ejaculate within 3 minutes of intercourse. I mean, no man is going to be deeply fulfilled, and certainly no woman is going to be deeply fulfilled with that kind of experience. So I think that's a huge piece of it. And some kind of, like, on many levels, an avoidance of intimacy and having no conscious idea why, right? It's just that there's that fear about intimacy, vulnerability, sexual vulnerability. And of course there would be, right? When you are having that thing, that trauma, that violation, what I would consider even sexual abuse done to a boy, often hours or minutes after he's born, or weeks after he's born, whatever tradition it is. Like, to me, it's abhorrent and it's evil. And, so I think that there's just an overall avoidance of intimacy, and however that manifests physically, emotionally. And then it's a recognition of that and owning that. And it's really, I want to give props and hope to men. Like, I do believe that all things can be healed. But the first step is to acknowledge that it happened and acknowledge that this was a violation. Because if people are really in denial about it, it's never going to shift, right? And I think that even when things have been done to us and we know what we know when we know it, or it was out of our control, the way, part of how we heal is we do better and share what we know then with the next generation or whoever we can. That's part of the healing process, even for us. So I have a men's course that I run called Sexual Mastery for Men, and there's a lot of information in there about basically reconnecting to the cock and cock love and owning the cock, inhabiting the cock, lengthening, strengthening the cock, but overall just becoming in touch with your sexual energy. As a man, sexual energy is this massively healing, cleansing, revitalizing force. And if we're learning to use it in the body and breathe it and recirculate it through us, it knows what to do and it knows where to go. And it will naturally heal and unblock places where we've had trauma or stuck energy. It will shift that. It moves through our energy meridians, even without us knowing where we're directing that energy. Like, that's next level, practices, but even through breathing and moving sexual energy through our body, it will heal us and find places where we have stagnation and cleanse it out. It's miraculous that way, right? It's the life force energy. And this is what I'm saying, is that when people aren't aware of that and they are dissociated from their sexual energy, they're operating at a deficiency. And in the most positive sense, they have this tool that most people really have no idea that they have, even though it's literally at their fingertips, to heal and revitalize themselves and to transcend into higher states of being and consciousness.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that, because it actually relates personally to me. Like, I've always been someone who can be really, really vulnerable, but the sex act was not very intimate. There was something when I was growing up in my teens and my 20s, it was like really hard for me to feel really connected and intimate. And as I've evolved and grown and learned, like, I'm just curious about these questions of what an act at age 2 days old or 3 days old or a week old or whatever the case may be, in the most sacred area of your body, the lower chakras, like the base of who you are, how that impacts you. So it's just amazing that you're helping men to heal that and work through that. And yeah, it's pretty awesome. And it's something that's just not talked about. Like, this issue gets me really fired up because it's like, like what you said, it's like you have dads who are like, well, I want my kid to look like me. You know what I'm saying? Like what the fuck? And from my education, like, doctors, let's not get into the allopathic system, but up until 1980, they believed that children couldn't remember pain or feel pain. Like, that was the ruling paradigm of the allopathic system. Was like, oh yeah, they don't feel pain. Oh, look, they just disassociate. They wouldn't use those terms. Oh, the babies fell asleep. They just fell asleep when it happened. So it just blows my mind that happens. But again, to know that you can heal anything if you go deep enough in the body and you have respect for it. And I love what you said about like worshiping your cock, like falling in love with it and not being like this thing like, oh, like I don't know what this is, or I don't know. I just think it's really, really important. Really important. So
it also says a lot to the state of our society where, as a collective, people are so dissociated from the power of their sexuality that it's easy to sell people on that notion to cut off your child's genitals the moment they're born. Right? Yeah. Like, that's a pretty massive thing, right? And the fact that most people just accept that, like, oh, no problem, like, do what you have to do, right? It's like, how disconnected are we overall that that's completely acceptable?
It's mind-blowing to consider that this is the norm in our culture in many places around the world. Like, what is the framework within our psyche that we created for this to exist now? And my question for you is that, like, do you think there is like intention from like some ancient sense in like all these religious writings, like knowing what effect it would have on humanity and sexual connection and sexual energy that can be harnessed for humans?
Absolutely, 1,000% that it's a deliberate thing. And think of the symbolism of it, like cutting off that part of the body, the symbolism of being cut off from that energy. And even in, religious teachings where they claim that there's some kind of foundation for that. If you go further, and I've seen texts that basically say it's a way to cut people off from their sexual urges or their sexual energy. And so there, there's no place where there's a legitimate, well, there couldn't be, because it's a ridiculous act, right? But it's all definitely coming out of that place of creating injury. I mean, Dr. Kellogg in the US, who is the big proponent of circumcision in America, actually said, he wanted to get the boys at age 12, 12, 13, 14, so that he could stop them from being overly connected to their sexual energy. He wanted to burn off female clitorises with carbolic acid. And for some reason, I don't know, they didn't accept that, but they were okay with the idea of cutting off parts of male genitalia. So I absolutely think there's a sinister,
It's
motion
ridiculous.
behind it, because how could there not be? It's in writing,
right.
all over the place. And this is where I think that people are quite in denial about if you really understood what sexual energy is, then you would automatically see this as a deliberate affront to it. Right? If you buy into the notion, because you've been programmed that way, that sex is dirty, it is taboo, there is something kind of wrong with it, then it would be much easier to accept these ideas of burning off someone's genitals or cutting them off.
Yeah, I mean, as always, knowledge makes man unfit to be a slave. So empowering ourselves through what's possible, through harnessing sexual energy and learning, going out of your way to discover the benefits and what's possible for you, as innately, obviously, is going to help in deprogramming from these concepts. But I mean, we're kind of programmed to deny our desires and natural urges and pleasures in general, even outside of sex. To have desires is to be against God in some sense, is what we're programmed to believe.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the sexual energy, life force energy, is such a core force that like I said, when people are cut off from it, they're operating at a deficiency. But when they're in tune with it, everything in their life changes. And this is one of my main messages I try to show people is, yes, your intimate relationship with your partner is so much better. That becomes the super fuel that is energizing your entire life, feeding your entire life. But your body often changes because you're getting all of this juicy energy moving through you. Addictive habits that people once had will often fall away because they're not sourcing that energy from outside of themselves. They're getting it from within. Their work life often changes. They start to do work that's more in alignment with their true selves, because our sexual energy is the essence of who we are. And when they're finally in touch with it, they often stop doing things that aren't in alignment with them, whether that's work or friends or partners, even, where they start to connect more to that own inner truth. And I would say, extending that out into the world, is that we have a much clearer view of what's happening in reality. Because if we're carrying around that massive sex delusion, it's like a rose colored glass or filter that we're then using to view the entire world. It's gaslighting, right? It's gaslighting. And so I feel like the more places that we have gaslighting going on in our reality that we're still a victim of, we're under that spell, then we don't see anything clearly. Right? It distorts everything because we have all of these gaslighting filters put in front of our vision. And so even now in what we're experiencing in the world, there's so much gaslighting currently. And I see myself is like the places where I've been working to remove any other remaining gaslighting in my life and my experiences is my contribution to the collective of, if I can do that in my life, I'm helping to raise that vibration of truth and clarity, not only in myself, but in the world at large, because that's to me, the main illness right now is, being separated from the truth and this giant gaslighting that's going on. And I think people because it's the original psy-op and one of the biggest, if not the biggest, if people can clear that with their sexuality, it gives them, I would say, so much more immediate access to divine guidance, their inner truth, and the truth of what they observe in the world around them.
Yeah, I have a friend who went through your program, and she said that her entire world changed. She was grappling with identity issues, gender issues, this and that, and went through it and got so clear, turned on that life force energy, turned on the sexuality, and has been able to see like the lies that are being fed in so many ways around us. I don't want to say just, but just from lightening that up and getting connected to that deep energy and that deep wisdom, and getting all that energy flowing through your meridians. Like, I mean, it's fucking amazing and incredible to do that. Like, and again, it goes back to even like, how can you see the truth in the world if you don't even know the truth of who you are? You know what I mean? Like, just in general, like, just like do the inner work. And of course, we're focusing now on sexuality and that sexual energy, and then how that fuels so much in your psyche, and then how you relate with the external world as well. So yeah, it's pretty cool stuff, and powerful and scary, I think, for a lot of people. So I guess I'm curious for you, like, what do you like, where it's like this thing that it will help them discover the truth of who they are and the whole world, and yet, oh fuck, I'm scared of that shit, you know? Like, how do you find that with people you work with? What's some of the resistance that comes up for people to accepting this and embracing this?
Well, I'm really glad to hear that about your friend. And that's such a great testament to the power of sexual energy, right? This giant cleanser and truth teller and rejuvenator in all elements of a person's life. Like, I think by the time people get to me, they're ready, right? Like, a lot of the times what I've seen over decades of being in the personal growth world is that people can do a lot of work on themselves, even in relationships. And then they almost have to build up a certain level of stamina, and then they're ready to take on the sexual piece, right? It's sort of like they've been dancing around all kinds of things, you know, their diet, meditation, their body, their whatever. And then they come upon the sex piece. And usually, because my work is holistic, the way they'll hear me talk about sex and the power of sex, it'll be immediately resonant, right? Like a truth that resonates deep inside of them. They just no one had articulated it in that way before, right? And so you've got, like, you know, like, say, medical people being, well, sex is good for you, like it'll raise your, you know, your oxytocin in like this very clinical sort of way. Or you've got the sort of cosmo giggly, like, oh, here's 99 tips to play with his willy. Like, you know, like these extremes of like clinical, sterile, and giggly juvenile. And then something in the middle of that, which is my work, which is like, you know, embracing the voraciousness, the salaciousness, and the spirituality, the actual high energy potential of sex, and using it as a conscious power source. And so I think when they hear that language, they're very ready. And so a huge part of my work, though, is what I said earlier, like removing these blockages that have been superimposed upon people and helping people to even find them, right? Like, so for you, you've already done some work to discover or acknowledge that circumcision is a trauma that was done, right? And so, okay, how do I clear this? And for some people, they might not even know that, right? Or they've had a history of sexual abuse and they've never done anything to really clear it. And so that might then manifest now as symptoms of a low libido, or for women, something I call a vagina on lockdown, which is like a woman's vagina will tighten up and not open, not let anyone into it. And they'll go, you know, to their doctor, and their doctor's, oh, you've got this condition called vagina. It had some name for it, like vaginal dysphasia. I don't even know. I have to look these things up when people come to me, because they're just these invented, useless terms, you know? And so there's some term for it. It's like, okay, so you don't know what it is. You don't know how she got it, and you don't know how to fix it. Well, I do, actually, right? So, you know, inevitably that person then has a history of sexual abuse. So her vagina is locking down, saying, don't come in until you heal me. I am not ready for anything until you go back and heal the trauma that's been done. So this is a huge part of the work that I do, right? Is uncovering these things that have been laid upon the innate spirit of the person and energy of the person. Did you ever read that book, Born to Run?
Oh, I have it, but never wrote it. Is it Christopher McDougall? Did he write it?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite books ever. It's so brilliantly written. And he talks about how, you know, that he was part of the whole, what do you call it, like barefoot running movement. And he did all this research into different cultures and even scientific studies. And he found that there's absolutely no humans were born to run, that we as a species, actually, we used to outrun our prey over long distances. So we weren't good at the short sprints, like say a tiger or a lion, but we could run for like 24 hours straight. And that's how we would catch animals. And so we are born to run. So these ideas that running's bad for your knees or whatever, what's actually messed people up is running shoes. The thing that is sold to people as an implement to use to, help them or correct them is actually what's fucking everybody up, is running shoes. And this is the same idea, sexually speaking, is that people are innately born to be sexual. Every single person has this ability to be incredibly beautifully sexually expressed, but it's all of the conditioning that's been put on top of them. So, we're getting rid of the running shoes. That's a huge part of my work. So I wouldn't say that there's necessarily fear. It's more just like unconsciousness. I think the fear gets tempered with the hope of, wow. And this is in my own podcast. I have a segment called Well Fucked All Stars, where I interview people who've gone through my salons, where they've gone from, let's say, never having an orgasm before to, having every orgasm under the sun, like all in a row, or a man who was, ejaculating in 5 minutes and now after a week can last an hour. So I show people that this is possible for everybody. And so I think whatever fear or anxiety is tempered by, what if I could do that too? The hope, and here's how you do it.
What is the correlation between harnessing sexual energy in the right conscious way and also abundance in your actual life once you've tapped into that?
Well, years ago, I would observe in working with people where I'd heard, the idea that second chakra is sex, money, and creativity. And so it seemed logical then there would be some kind of connection there, right? And sexual energy is creative energy. And I noticed myself that the more in touch with that energy I am, I use that in my day-to-day life. I have a hashtag powered by vagina, because I say my vagina created my world. My sexual energy created my reality. And so abundance is an extension of that. So I was working with this couple years ago, and they were self-employed. And so their income, was like this. They'd get clients, they'd do well, they wouldn't get clients, they would have to borrow money from friends, and it was very, very feast or famine for them. And so we were working intensely in their relationship. And every time we would clear a significant block, we'd have a major breakthrough in their relationship. The next day, they would literally get a phone call, like for a job offer, or, somebody's like giving them money that they'd owed them for like the last year and hadn't paid it. I was like, holy, like it was that distinct, that every time we would shift some energy, they would get some money. And then I've just seen that more and more and more over the years, both in my own life, but also in my clients, where they talk about how money just seems to fall into their laps because their lap is what attracted it, right? That it's like when you start to give your gift back to the world and you become a self-realized person, the universe just brings that back to you, right? And I think what I said earlier is that the more that people get in touch with their own true expression and their vocation, right? They're showing up in the world and giving their true gifts to the world. And of course, the universe just rewards that and sends it back to them in abundance.
Yeah. So interesting. Just quickly from an astrological perspective, like the 5th house ruled by Leo also references passion, creativity, and sex. Like creativity and sex are always intrinsically linked in all these ancient divination arts. So I completely agree with your assessment there.
Yeah.
What has allowed, I guess, porn to proliferate in our culture to such an extent? Is this the gateway or the escape route from our denial of the truth about sex?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say that's another massive distortion. I mean, there's a reason why it's free and available, and anyone, we could go online right now and find some without having to get behind a paywall or anything like that, right? And so I do believe it's deliberate, and it just removes people from that actual conscious divine source energy and looking at sex that way. And it's very addictive, right? It's very addictive. And especially for men, there's like massive issues with dopamine and testosterone depletion, and then having to extract themselves out of that. But, you know, I don't know how deep you guys go into this stuff, but this idea of like loosh energy harvesting, right? That when people are offering up that energy, it is being harvested by other dimensions or entities. It's deliberate.
We're here for the truth, so we're all about this information. And I hear you there. You know, as someone who I would say grappled with porn addiction in my teens and my 20s, like it's a real thing, and it's something that a lot of men struggle with, and it's just it's wild. So it's about coming back to center, doing the work that's necessary, and healing yourself. Because what is it that we want? What is it that we want in this 5 minutes, in this 3 minutes? And then after it happens, it's like, I don't know many men that feel so amazing about themselves after they do it. You know, it's like, I just sat down in my chair looking like a little gremlin, like fucking masturbating, like pulling my dick out and masturbating. And then afterwards, I just felt amazing. And I just wanted to go and connect with my wife, or go, you know, write a novel, or do all these things. You know what I mean? It's just like, this is not the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that you do feel like that when you're having what I call gourmet sex. Like I would call porn an expression of junk food sex, right? You get a quick hit, a high momentarily, and then you're depleted, versus gourmet sex where you're feeling nourished and energized after that. And what was I going to say about that? There's something more about your analogy of
a gremlin having sex, a gremlin with his dick out, just jerking off in front of a screen. I don't know.
There's something, it'll come to me, but I guess, well, you know, I have something I call meditate, masturbate, create, MMC, where I suggest to people that they go and, okay, the archetype of the feminine. Like, I think the allure on a more deep level is the archetype of the ever available, completely open, sexually feminine, right? That's kind of the promise of porn. It's not the true promise, but it's like the message of a woman who's always ready, always available, always there for you, right? Will do anything. And I think in a really harmonious, intimate relationship, that is the truth, right? The couple is so connected that the woman is fully open, is fully surrendered. Everything's on the table or in the bed because you guys are that close and intimate, not from a cheapened, you know, junk food, let's tick the box and do the sex act, but because she's so fully open in trust and surrender and vulnerability, right? So I think that's the hidden promise of porn. But the way that I talk to people about using their energy instead is if they were to self-pleasure, breathe that energy up, and then go do something, right? Like I call them coffee breaks. I don't do coffee, I do orgasms, right? Like, so throughout the day, if I'm feeling a bit of low energy, I'll go and self-pleasure or connect with my partner or use my jade yoni egg and breathe and recirculate that energy, and then go back to work and feel mentally and creatively revitalized because I've actually used that energy and harnessed it. And now I'm channeling it out into my work. So what you described can happen. I just wouldn't say it's happening with porn.
Got it.
I've heard this concept so often of harnessing that energy upwards, like even like ejaculating up the spine, the whole Jacob's ladder idea. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what that actually is?
Well, most people, when they get sexually aroused, they have a buildup at the genitals and they just eject all that energy out of them into the ethers. And that's really shown when men pass out after ejaculation, right? They're so depleted. They've taken all that energy out. And so from the ancient Taoist and Tantric traditions is the idea that instead of ejecting that energy out of us, we take it and recirculate it internally so we have it to use. And so the easiest way to do that is through deep breathing, right? So a good 4-count inhale, 4-count exhale, breathing that energy throughout the body. And, you know, in more advanced practices, you can visualize that energy coming up the spine or moving it throughout your body, directing it to different places in the body as a healing energy. But even deep breathing will do it, you know, because most people, when they're, especially men people, when they're getting sexually aroused, they tend to breathe really shallow, hold the breath, tighten up the body, like, and then just, you know, collapse, right? Everyone's seen that face. Every woman knows that face. Unless you guys are using a mirror, you'll know it too. And then pass out, right? That's the barometer. That what I say to people after you have sex, do you feel energized, rejuvenated, transformed, and like it changed your life? And if not, then you're doing it wrong, which is not a judgment. It's just saying that sex ought to give you energy rather than take away energy. That is the true use of sex. So that's what these traditions were really all about in ancient India and China, was how do we use sex as an energy source? How do we use sex as a healing source? How do we use sex as medicine for ourselves?
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest issue facing men and women, like in partnerships that you find and couples you work with? What do you think is the biggest issue? Or a few big issues?
Well, I'd say one of them is just this idea of clearing blockages, right? Is like people were fed this notion in the culture that after 2 years, it's normal for a relationship not to be that sexy anymore. And you just have to deal with it, you know, welcome to your life, right? Like you'll have a boring relationship for the rest of your life, like hormones, like it's not that at all. It's like grow or die. People get to a plateau. They don't have the tools to really up level and take things to the next level in their relationship, and so they go backwards, right? So dealing with blockages, having the tools to figure out, well, how do we keep growing in our relationship to keep going forward? And then I'd say the other, in addition to that, is like the masculine feminine dynamics, the idea of sexual polarity, where, you know, have you guys discussed this on the podcast?
Not in depth.
Well, you mean masculine, feminine polarity?
Yeah.
No, I mean, we talked a little bit about like just the feminization of men and like the, you know, alpha beta, which I want to get into with you as well. So.
Yeah. So look, you know, in modern culture where women have taken on more masculine traits to try to get things done and achieve in the world, and then men have taken on more feminine traits to, you know, get more in touch with their emotions, and which is all good, except that, you know, it's neutralized the idea of polarity, where if we have a strong masculine charge and a strong feminine charge, we attract. And if you have two feminines and two masculines, we repel each other, right? And so as a result of the, you know, equality movement, which is great, women should vote and work and do whatever they want, but like there's this idea that neutrality was the goal, right, of having a really gender neutral relationship. And now in the whole social justice warrior arena, that's another thing, right? Like gender doesn't exist, male and female don't exist. Like the apps, like I've spoken out about this before, like to me that's absolutely ludicrous and another giant psy-op, you know, that's basically paving the way for transhumanism, where we don't have humans who reproduce naturally. We have machines or test tubes or whatever, right? Like it's got many layers to it, but I think that's one of them. So I think that's a big aha moment. Like I can't think of a single couple or individual who's done my work and not been like, oh, because for many couples, let's say the woman is a lot in her masculine energy and the man is in his feminine energy, and they're butting heads, right? And so by masculine, feminine, maybe I'll break that down a little bit. So if we look at the archetypal qualities of masculine and feminine, so feminine is like this idea of openness, receptivity, surrender, going with the flow. Masculine is about really getting out there and taking action and getting things done, being assertive. And we both have masculine and feminine, but I would say that men tend to have more masculine, women tend to have more feminine, and that's beautiful. You know, I believe that we celebrate these archetypes and differences and value them and enjoy them rather than trying to pretend they don't exist, right?
Yeah.
And so,
or call them toxic, or call them toxic, or call it toxic. You know,
right. There can be toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. That there might be some truth in that, but generally, what people are labeling as that isn't, right? They're just you know, criticizing it in general. So people exist in this dynamic where often what happens is that in the modern world, the woman is taken on more masculine energy. She is the ruler of the house. She sees the reins in the relationship and in their lives because she feels like the man can't, And so the man is feeling belittled, criticized by the woman. And so he has stepped back in the relationship and he's just letting her lead the way. Like, whatever you say, honey, like doesn't want to have a fight, doesn't want to get into it. It's just like, whatever, I'll concede. But that makes her more angry and he is resentful. And so they're existing in this, constantly butting heads. They're not happy, right? I have never, ever in my whole career of doing this work found a couple who is happy with the woman being in the masculine and the man being in the feminine. If I scratch the surface, they're miserable and frustrated and really upset. And so then there's this work to help the woman accept and inhabit more of her feminine and the man inhabit more of his masculine. And I've been talking about that lately in the beta alpha male idea. And that's where I see people most flourish and be the most happy when they are in the bodies that they were given.
Yeah. No,
and
absolutely.
I feel like when you think of porn, when you think of Hollywood, negative role modeling, when you think of all these things, it's like another psy-op to take masculine men and make them more feminine or alphas to turn them into betas. Because in my view is if you have a bunch of betas and there's shit going on in this world, who's going to stand up? So, it's easier to take over a society, take over a culture when there's a bunch of betas running around. Those are my thoughts. So.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read The Way of the Superior Man by David Data, but he talks about this a lot in his work as well. How these polarities are out of balance for most of us. And a man needs to be connected to his purpose first and foremost to really embody his masculine. Whereas these days now, men, they feel guilty or they feel bad for not helping as much around the house, not helping as much with the kids, not, So they've kind of, to some extent, given up their purpose or given away their purpose or put their purpose as secondary. But when a man is in his alpha and is connected to the masculine, he's driven by his purpose first and foremost, and his woman is supporting him in that. And she's, I guess, a counterpart in that relationship.
Yeah, he does amazing work around polarity. I'm very familiar with his work. And I agree with that, like that a man, it's really important for a man, but and a woman too, to be connected to their life force energy, right? Like their dharma, right? The gifts that they have to give to the world. I think if they're not connected to that, people are miserable. They may not know why they're miserable, but so it's a huge thing for both men and women.
Yeah,
I agree.
You think this is a good place to stop part one?
Yeah, I think this is a beautiful place to stop part one. To the public that's listened so far, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been an incredible conversation with Kim thus far. If you'd like to continue on, please consider joining our community over at Patreon. There's lots going on over there, and you get access to our entire full episodes and the rest of this episode too. Kim, anything you want to leave our public audience with before we let them go here?
Yeah, go and check out my Orgasmic Enlightenment podcast, my YouTube channel. I have tons and tons of free information and techniques out there to help get you on the path.
Awesome.
Cool.
To our members, keep listening and we'll be with you shortly. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back to our members. Thank you so much for your support. We're back here with Kim Anami, amazing holistic sex and relationship expert. And we want to start with this. You speak about this a lot on your podcast and blogs and Instagram, the differences of orgasms. Like you mentioned, I know G-spot, cervical, and other ones. And I'm just curious what the differences are. Because, there are women out there probably like, I don't even know if I've even had an orgasm, let alone like there are all these different ones we can have. So if anything you want to share on that, just to give a little like foundation on the differences and the benefits.
Yeah. So look, I'm all about vaginal orgasms for women. And most women would say that they have clitoral orgasms. And we think of the clitoris as being the little bulb and at the top of the vulva, usually stimulated externally. And I say to women, the good stuff is in the vagina. The clitoris is literally the tip of the iceberg. It's 10% of the pleasure and power that you can experience sexually. And so in the vagina, it's like Van Gogh's Starry Night Sky. There's all of these pleasure points and pressure points. There's a whole acupressure map within the vagina. And so all of that is available to the woman. And the deeper you go, the deeper you go. And so in my experience and how I teach, is that clitoral orgasms are much more superficial. Like they're kind of fun. It's like eating some sugar. You get a bit of a hit, but they're not going to change your life. And I want to change people's lives. I want people's sexual experiences to change their lives. And so by having deeper internal vaginal orgasms, so G-spot orgasms primarily, and then cervical orgasms as the holy grail, right? So the most transcendent, life-changing, ecstatic, last for days even orgasm that a woman can have. And both of these orgasms require more surrender, more openness, more sexual self-knowledge from the woman. And to be with a partner, she feels safe, and like it's safe for her to let go. Like, if I fall, you will catch me. That's the experience in there. And so because of that, because she needs to traverse these deeper and more profound places in herself to get there, they're not that easy, right? If it was that easy, you could read any article online that says use the two fingers, do the come hither motion, and why are women not having these orgasms left, right, and center? That's because what separates the wheat from the chaff, or the clitoris from the vagina, is this deeper process of really letting go, right? So when you mentioned, do people ever have fear and anxiety? I would say there's an element of that to these deeper orgasms, of this precipice, right? This void that women need to open up and jump into to get to these higher, deeper levels. And so it's a full like letting go, right? A rebirth. This really is the epitome of that French phrase, the little death and rebirth, le petit mort. Mm-hmm. And that happens in the vagina. And so I say that vaginal orgasms for women really are essential good fuck medicine, because they're therapeutic, they're transcendent, they are cleansing, rejuvenating, cataclysmic, and bring a woman into her true self. And so if she's not having them, she's really missing out on a lot. And so again, every woman can have them. It's just a matter of women knowing that the journey inward is really the journey inward, right? Like, for example, the cervix is the heart point for reflexology in women. And so a woman really needs to be open-hearted. It's not the kind of orgasm she would just have with casual sex or with her partner that she's feeling defended against. So let's say that the couple has an argument at breakfast time, right? And they go to have sex after dinner, and they haven't really cleared that argument. They haven't resolved it, right? And so she probably, in her body, that will register. She might not get as wet as she normally does. She won't be able to reach those deeper orgasms because there's something lingering in the space. I talk about the internal feng shui of the relationship. And the same thing could happen to the man. He might not get a really strong erection, or he might come extra quickly because there's unresolved stuff in the space. So that's where orgasms really are barometers, and these deeper, more profound orgasms even more so, right? It's like there is no pretending here, there is no lying here, right? Like the body knows the truth, and when you bring it the truth and you bring it this full openness, it will, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah. Is this something too where also like things can be passed down through generations? So like someone's like having these issues, but it's like, well, they come from a lineage of people who haven't done the inner work or haven't had these kinds of experiences. And so, it's all about breaking the cycle and doing the work. And you brought up like the meridian system and reflexology. So it's like, I'm assuming there are exercises and types of massage or things that you can do to fire up and get those meridians clear and the energy flowing, so you can waken up those the impulses or the nerves to allow something like this to happen. Is that true?
I'd say that's part of it, but I'd say the primary work is internal, meaning energetic and emotional. So the physical stuff can help move energy, yes, but I'd say the primary work is you know, you mentioned potentially like, you know, generational stuff, which I think we all carry, you know, we are the product of, but we can heal these things in ourselves, right? We can be, it stops with me. And if you believe in the idea of miasms, where the healing you do can go backwards in time and forwards in time, right? Can actually affect the lineage in both directions. So, that's the bulk of what I do, is this internal work. I can give people the right techniques, and sure, sometimes a technique is better than another technique, but that's probably 15% of what really gets people there, especially for these deeper experiences, right? It's having to clear that inner space through examining blockages, you know, recreating your beliefs, you know, optimizing your entire like view of what sexuality is, and then bringing that forward, clearing out your relationship, you know, doing feng shui in the relationship, like that example I gave about having an argument at dinner. For most couples, they'll have years, if not decades, of unspoken stuff, unresolved stuff. And I often use this analogy of a clear pane of glass that exists between a couple, and you're on one side, your partner's on the other side. And when you first come together, you're often like really earnest and open and honest, and you share everything, and that glass stays clear. As the relationship goes on, you're like, oh, I don't want to say that, I might hurt their feelings. Like a splotch of mud goes on the glass. Another sin of omission, a splotch goes on the glass. A white lie, splotch goes on the glass. An outright lie, mud, brick goes on the glass, to the point where people build up then this barrier between the two of them, and no one feels excited or attracted or turned on behind that barrier. And so a huge part of what I do is a technique actually clearing the glass. That's what I talk about, is how do we clear the glass between us? And the glass clearing might be decades old stuff that's crud that we need like a power washer to get off the glass and like a jackhammer, or it could just be, like I said, an argument earlier that day that we just need to talk about it, address it, and then move on. But that's the inner work, is like that metaphor of glass cleaning within the relationship and within ourselves, right? So let's say for you, like as a man who's been circumcised, or a man who's had sexual abuse, or a man who's had a couple of bad relationships he hasn't really healed from, right? All of that baggage then is brought into the bed. Like think of the princess and the pea, except people have got suitcases, you know, like wedged under their mattresses, and people are like sleeping on them, you know, like, oh, why is my back totally out? Like your back, you know, it's like that serious, right? Where the pain can be that distinct from all of this stuff that people are carrying around, depositing in their beds, but never addressing. Just getting used to having a bad back and then going to the chiropractor because they think they have a back problem, right? When really it's all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, like what we're talking about is shadow work at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and each individual, because again, you kind of need both people to do their own individual work as well in order for this to happen. Because if not, then it's just there's going to be issues, I think.
I fully agree. And I talk about demon hunting, right? That we don't let our demons just come to us. We go out there, we hunt them down. We try to figure out like what we have, you know, in the shadows we need to address and then alchemize. But you're right, is that like both people, for my work really to be effective, both people need to be doing it. If one person's doing it, then I often say to people, because they'll come to me and say, well, I really want to do this work, but my partner's not that into it. And I'm like, okay, you start doing the work. And usually what will happen is like, they'll notice changes in you and be like, oh, well, geez, like what are you doing? Because you're so different, you know, you're more easygoing, or you've let go, or you want to give me more blowjobs, or whatever it is, right? And so, but then so that person might then be, you know, intrigued to follow along in that work. Or if they're not, then the first person will be like, well, I'm clear about where I am and what I want, and I don't want this. But yeah, it really long term, it doesn't work unless both people are participating. Because I say there's three entities in the relationship. There's you, there's me, and there's the entity of the relationship itself. And each of them needs to be doing conscious work.
Yeah, I agree fully with that.
In the intermittence there, you're talking a little bit about this whole sexual psy-op. I'd like to dive a little bit deeper on that with you. Like, well, how does that appear today, and how does that appear in our relationships, and how do we begin to cleanse that? Like, what is the programming that can be undone, and how can we go about that work?
I think it's identifying the beliefs that we've taken in from these various levels and messaging of the psy-op, right? So, for example, a message that women often take in that's repeated all over the culture in movies, advertising, is like Madonna whore, right? Where the woman is either a slut or a hooker. Do you notice like every Hollywood movie has a hooker? There's always a hooker. Always, even if she makes a brief appearance, right? Like just to reinforce that paradigm. Or she's a virgin. She's, needs to be coerced into having sex. There really isn't a place for a happy medium of a woman to exist with a healthy relationship to her sexuality. And so that's been imprinted upon women and men. And so it's identifying, okay, so maybe I don't want to believe this, but I think I've taken it in, right? Most women will have grown up with that fear. If they're too sexual, they're going to be called a slut or a whore or whatever it is, right? Some denigration about her sexuality if it's too obvious or she's enjoying it too much. So she's going to have internalized that. So it's trying to make, as you said, the shadow or the internal, external, the unconscious, conscious. What have I believed? Okay, so I'm a feminist. I know I'm entitled to good sex, but some part of me has still taken that in, right? So what do we do then to exorcise that, to shift it? And then what do I want to believe? Well, I want to believe that women are healthy, voracious, multi-orgasmic, libidinous creatures who are ejaculating until they're 80 years old. That's what I'm going to take on, right? And then the same thing for men. Maybe the men might buy into this idea like, men aren't really supposed to be with one person. It's men's role to spread the seed and women's role to tend the seed. Like I could never really just be happy with one woman, like, again, maybe you're like, well, I'm a conscious advanced man. I don't really believe that, but maybe a little part of you does, right? Like a little part of you is still, well, how could I not fucking believe it when it's like I get bombarded with that message every day, all the media that I watch, or have watched or just imprinted upon us. And so it's just getting rigorously honest with that and trying to identify those potential things or beliefs that we've taken in and then replace them. Right. And if we have a conscious partner, then we have that ability to have those conversations with them and to help identify and call it out and see it in each other. And then to go forward and consciously create the relationship we want. And I have coined a phrase, conscious monogamy, which is that my assertion is that most people are not in monogamous relationships, or, they're in unconscious relationships. Like they just have shitty relationships. They, just got a little freeze there. So they live in a place where they live in that tacit, don't ask, don't tell. They're not having radical honesty between them. Maybe they don't have sex with other people, but they're not really having sex with each other. They're not having deep, powerful, holy fuck style, gourmet sex, 3-hour orgasms, hit the ceiling, feel cracked open and obliterated kind of sex. They're having whatever, maintenance sex, if they're even having that. So to me, that's not even really monogamy. That's just a shitty relationship. So when people say like monogamy doesn't work, I'm like, well, your shitty relationship doesn't work, but I don't think you even know what monogamy is because you're not even experiencing it. You don't have a deep, powerful, life-changing relationship. So when people ask me that, because polyamory is a big topic these days, and like, well, what do you think about polyamory? And I'm like, well, I don't think about it. Like I don't, my view is that when people are having conscious monogamy, they are extremely fulfilled. And over the decades of being around all kinds of different people, close friends of mine, even, spending time within those polyamorous communities, inevitably, like the couples are like, well, we're so liberated, we're so evolved because we have this polyamorous relationship. And then I scratch under the surface, like I talk to them to see like, well, what's your history? Like, how did you get here? Well, the wife has had sexual abuse, trauma, and we got to this standstill in our relationship. And instead of actually doing any work on that, they just decided to fuck other people and open up their relationship, right? And so every single couple I've talked to, there was always a moment like that where they got stuck. And instead of diving deeper into that work, they opened up their relationship. So I had a couple who came to one of my Bali retreats years ago, young, maybe, you know, early 30s, really hot, attractive couple, had a pretty good sex life, but she'd never had G-spot orgasms before. And that was her big goal for the retreat. She wanted to have a G-spot orgasm. She wanted to squirt. That was her like big thing, right? So my retreat is like a microcosm of the work and my whole philosophy around sexuality. So on the first day, we have big conversations about block clearing and demon hunting and shadow work. And then I send them off to do this work with themselves, right? These intense conversations. And they're like, where's the champagne and blowjobs? I'm like, you'll get there after you clear some space, you know? So they go away, they do that. Then the next day we're talking about female orgasms. So G-spot, cervical, squirting. And so this couple had in their life, they would occasionally invite other people into their bed. That was part of their whole dynamic, right? So that next night they go to do their homework on the G-spot and they started exploring and didn't really go anywhere. And they were like, look, let's finish off the conversations we were having yesterday about the block clearing and, you know, stuff in our relationship that's piled up over the years. Let's deal with that. So they stayed up till like 1 a.m. having these deep conversations. Every morning we have yoga and meditation. They skipped yoga and meditation and they were like, let's work on our G-spot home play this morning instead. So they did. And she ends up having her very first G-spot orgasm. She's like ejaculating all over the sheets, all over his face. She's laughing hysterically. She's crying uncontrollably. She's having this massive cathartic release, right? And it was hilarious because like throughout the week then afterward, everybody has their own bungalows on this sort of rice terrace. And, you know, you could see people's bungalows, but you're not in earshot or you couldn't really see inside of them. But we would watch like in the afternoon, like the man would come with his sheet. He'd come to the edge of the balcony and like shake the sheet out and like lay it like to dry out on the railing because she just kept, you know, drenching it with her ejaculate. So they come back and they're talking about how, you know, they finally felt like they'd hit some breakthroughs in this old stuff of theirs. And then the next morning, she has her first G-spot orgasm. So it's the most beautiful example of them, you know, rolling up their sleeves, getting in there of their past stuff and cleaning it up. If you build it, she will come, right? So then she's like squirting her little heart out, you know, for the rest of the week. So fast forward to the end of the week, we're having breakfast together on the last day. And they said, you know, now having experienced these depths in our relationship, we don't feel like we want to invite people into this anymore. Like we have never really gotten to this place. And now that we're here, you know, like this is like, who knows what'll happen in the future, but the way we're feeling right now, we don't think we want that anymore. You know, we're really like, we want to explore this. We're like, this is what we want. And, you know, to me, that's a really good illustration of most people just haven't really reached that depth. And I'm sure, you know, if there's people watching this and they think they really have, and I'm open to finally meeting a couple where their open relationship was not the product of a standstill at some point, you know, and that they really do have that depth with each other before they, you know, bring other people into that dynamic. I just haven't seen it. And I've been around for a while and asking people and studying this for a while. I'm open to it. Maybe it'll show up and, you know, but my overall experience is that even when people, because there's the brave facade that people give publicly, their story about why they're, like I said, I've always heard like why they're so evolved. Like this is the way, you know, this is the modern way. We're more evolved than you because we're doing this. And it's like, well, they've never really had that depth and intimacy, because when you have it, I believe that people really are infinite and endless, and you don't need to be having sex with multiple people. Like to me, if that idea that you're having sex with the same person for 20 years or 30 years, well, the only way you'd be having sex with the same person is if you're both committed to stagnation. If you're both growing and evolving, you're becoming different people all the time. So you're actually having sex with different versions of each other all the time. You're in a relationship with different versions of each other all the time, unless you're totally committed to never changing, then yes, you probably are having sex with the same person for 20 years.
Yeah, I love that you brought up this subject because I lived in New York City for 8 years. I've been in LA, Los Angeles for 8.5 years. And especially like you said, like, oh, we're so evolved. It just feels like polyamory has become this thing in like the spiritual communities, and like we're so evolved. And then, you know, men and women are, well, narcissistic men to some degree, I feel like. And I've always said that it feels like a lot of people are playing out their mommy and daddy issues under the guise of sexual liberation. Like we're so liberated, when it's like you just said, like, have they done the work to go deeper, deeper, deeper? And I say this not as someone who's like this fully enlightened master super cock man, because I'm not. I'll be the first one to say that. And I say this as someone also who, part of me wanted to be in that world for reasons that I knew were coming from a place of insecurity, from wanting validation, because I knew I could probably do well in that world, like, you know, like be smooth and charismatic. And it just, when you realize where it's coming from, I'm like, nah, no, I'm not into it. And there's just a lot of drama. And I don't want to knock anyone who's happy and healthy in that world. But like you said, all your years, it's like it's been hard to find someone who hasn't entered that from a place of like total consciousness and being in the most conscious monogamous relationship, and then going, hey, why not? Let's do this. You know, and I've experienced more drama from people that I know in that world than anywhere else. So anyways.
Well, I feel like that's quietly swept under the rug, right? Because it destroys that image of this being such an amazing thing. And look, if people truly are having satisfaction out of that, like, power to them. And I do, you know, one thing I have noticed that I've seen improve through those relationships is when a couple has a kind of a don't ask, don't tell relationship, right? Like not a radically honest relationship. And one of the things you really need in an open relationship is radical honesty, right? And so I've seen couples up-level their relationship from a place of radical, you know, dishonesty, really, where it's actually gotten better. The quality of the relationship has gotten better through that, because they've now entered into an arena where they're more honest. They're really communicating openly. They're not hiding those things. I still don't think that that's as good as a conscious monogamous relationship, but I have seen that improvement, you know, where they went from your typical, you know, lie, white lie, whatever kind of BS relationship to then at least being honest about what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Kim, I'm curious, and like whatever you're willing to share, like what were some of your like rites of passage, like in your life, like got you to being this, who you are, and helping people? Like, I'm just curious a little bit of your journey. I know you've traveled a lot and you've surfed, but I'm just curious what you're willing to share around that, like any like teachers that you found, or books that you've read, or life events. Joel,
yeah, like the aha moments where it was like, oh, this is my life's work. You mean those realizations?
Well, like from a young age, even in my teens, like I guess, you know, probably like in high school, I had this sense of like where I was going. I had planned out like a university path for myself, like this more like mainstream kind of life. And I had these quite pivotal realizations, like, I don't think that's my path. And then I was like, well, what is my path? Because like that was what I had envisioned for all these years, and what am I going to do, right? And I'm a very achievement oriented person, so that was really disorienting for me. And then it really turned into like, okay, well, what's the next right thing? You know, like I went and lived in London because I wanted to study acting. And then I moved back to North America and studied shamanism with some, you know, First Nations tribes, because I wanted to do that. And, you know, it just was like, follow the next right thing. And then that, you know, even in my late teens, I had this real interest in how do we change? How do we grow? How do we self-actualize? Like I'd read about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I was like, self-actualization, right? Is like, okay, that's the peak. And what I had, you know, slivers of that, like things that made me feel like the best version of myself. And so that led to me studying all these different modalities, from philosophy, transpersonal psychology, meditation, health, fitness, and then sex. Sex was one of those things that I would have sex and feel like I had taken drugs, like I had taken ecstasy, like I had had these total changes in my consciousness. Like I did a podcast on the psychedelics of sex. I'm like, you don't need anything external. You can get it from within. And So that was just this kind of then amalgamation of all of these things. And then I started doing coaching because I realized I had just amassed this wealth of tools and information that people were then seeming to be interested in. And it's like, well, maybe I become a teacher of this stuff because, it's sort of naturally happening that way. And then I brought sex into that. And when I would give talks or speak to people, it was like, the sex thing, they were like, you are so fired up when you talk about sex. Like you're excited about this other stuff, but something about you is just like on fire when you're talking about sex. And I took that in. And I remember years back, there's this thing around the world called pachachka. It's spelled Picha Kucha. It began in Japan, and it was this event where they would invite creatives to do this slideshow of your inspirations, so like architects, artists, painters, whatever, philosophers. And it's like 6 minutes and you get 20 seconds, or is it 30 seconds for 20 slides? And you put together like kind of a composite of a lot of the things that have inspired and shifted you over the course of your creative career. And so I was invited to do this thing. And I spoke to a friend of mine before, and I was like, do I go for it? Like, do I really go for it? Because I was like, things that inspire me are eating calm, like getting well fucked, right? And I'm like, just like go for it. So I did. So there's like 1,200 people, and some of my influences were like nature, or I don't know, I can't even remember, but like I had this one slide of like, there's a woman, she's got like, it's a beautiful artistic photo. She's got some cum on her chest, and it's like a silhouette of, she's got like a cock in her face and stuff. And I put this thing up, right? And then there's like this moment of shock in the audience, like silence, like they're just like, is that what I think? And then they just start howling and screaming and laughing. And it was just like this, affirmation about going for it, like unbridled, uncensored. Like there was a write-up in like a local paper about it afterward, like this, I was the highlight of the night, with this presentation and stuff, because I just, with my spiritual and sexual tips. And, that's been a real, like, I'd say that was sort of a pivotal moment of, do you dilute your truth and your voice, or do you go full throttle and throw it out there? And the reaction was full throttle. That's what is igniting people, right? And how I had the most fun, I had a blast doing that. And I think that's been my whole philosophy going forward, right? Like if it cracks me up, if it makes me laugh, like I start pissing myself laughing because I think it's fucking hilarious. Like I've just made myself crack up. That's a good sign, right? Like when I did the whole hashtag things I lift with my vagina. Okay, so this is a good story too. Like I'd hired these guys to create like a promotional video for my vaginal kung fu course. And we had all these like funny things, like I was lifting garden gnomes and doing all this stuff. But like when I saw the final edit, I was like, something is just not right about this video. Like it doesn't, I don't know, I don't think I can release it, right? So I spent all this money on it, and it was like, oh, like I still need something. Like I'd like to try to do different creative projects to promote my work, right? And then it came to me, like, I think, that gnome meme where people steal garden gnomes from people's yards and they take them all over the world, and then they shoot photos of them and send them back to the people. Something tweaked in me around the idea of me lifting objects with my vagina, so vaginal weightlifting all over the world in different locations. Like the meme of the gnome, the garden gnome, like ignited something in me. And so I was like, hashtag things I lift with my vagina. This is amazing. So I immediately like called my photographer. I'm like, let's go do a bunch of shoots around LA. I'll lift some donuts, because those are like in this gluten-free, coconut sweetened organic donuts from Cafe Gratitude. Like I'll lift some of those. I'll lift a crystal on the beach, I'll lift some organic juice from whatever, like Creation or something, like all these like LA, indigenous LA things. And then when I was on my way to Bali, I lifted like coconuts and mangoes and bananas and stuff. And then this thing went super viral, right? Like the most viral thing that I'm known for, like all over the world, publications all over the world. And, it was okay. So so the moral of all that is like, I'm putting out the creative energy of this video, right? Like I'm doing my part, I'm showing up, I'm taking risks, I'm putting myself out there. The video didn't meet my ultimate standards, but through the process of that, and also acknowledging that, right? Like that, okay, that isn't quite up to my standards, I'm gonna not do it. But the universe then gives me this other inspiration of like hashtag things I love to buy done, which is like the biggest campaign I've ever had now, ever. And it becomes this massive success. Like, I have a great time doing it. Like we traveled later to Italy and Spain and Morocco, like the following year, like doing all these lifting shots, me with a camel, me lifting a Murano glass chandelier, and it's like all of that coming back. So it's like being creative and taking chances and putting yourself out there and in that constant flow, right? Like it's big for me, is like trying to do things that I haven't done before, or say things in a way that I haven't done before. How do I keep challenging myself? And then that barometer, if it makes me laugh. So I said that thing to myself, like hashtag things I looked my vagina. I was like, that's fucking hilarious. Like I'm gonna do that, right? Yeah. And then it becomes this massive thing, So if it turns me on, that's a sign, that it's a good idea. And that if we're really in flow and, in touch with our sexual energy, it is a creative power that propels us out into the world and turns other people on, like maybe literally with like sexually, but just, creatively, like makes them laugh or, tweaks an idea in them, helps them to see something differently, because that whole vaginal weightlifting jade egg thing is all about creating pelvic floor strength for women, right? So the headline could have been, woman says, exercise your vagina so you don't pee your pants. Like not a very enticing headline, but true, right? That is the underlying like truth of the work, and instead it was like, woman adventurer travels the world lifting objects with her vagina, right? And then the sub headline is talking about vaginal strength and whatever, but it's a much more interesting, fun, playful, appealing way. And that's my way, right? That is my way of talking to people about sex and giving them this information, is creative, playful, a bit irreverent, but also very reverent at the same time. And that's my niche that I've created for myself, where I love to be. And, like I said, the barometer of, does it turn me on? Does it light me up? Does it make me laugh at myself? Well, that's a good idea then.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like part of my work is encouraging people to go and do what they really want to do. But the issue is that people aren't inclined to chase what excites them most. You know what I mean? Like, why can't you go for what excites you? But I feel like awakening this sexual energy, you realize that you should be going for what excites you. And that's kind of a correlation into your life outside of the sexual realms of just simply going for what excites you most. You know what I mean? And why can't you have that? And why can't that be the barometer for yourself and for the highest ideal? And this is something that's lacking in most of us. We just numb ourselves down. We limit our potential. We take second or third best because we believe that we can't have what livens us up more than anything.
Yeah, I agree too. And like, again, our podcast is called Here for the Truth, and it starts with internal truth too for yourself. And what I loved about your story when you had the different pictures up there and you said fuck it and you were the talk of the town is that you were just like, fuck it. Like, this is me. This is who I am. This is what lights me up. And when you do that, when you live your truth, you're going to attract all the other truth seekers and the truth livers and the people who are doing it themselves. And then you're not going to be that person sitting around being like, oh, why do I attract all the shitty relationships? Why do my friends, why are they crazy? Like if you're not, when you're living your truth, you're just going to attract dope ass people in your life. So it's so exciting. It's so inspiring. And like, yeah, not everyone's going to approve of it. Like, I'm sure there were probably some people that were like, oh, why is that person putting that up there? I don't like them. This is a much more sophisticated event going on right now. Who invited her? You know what I mean? And like, who cares? Like people are so worried about offending other people and wanting to people please and satisfy everyone else. And everyone needs to like me. And you spend all that time doing that and you're fucking miserable and you're not living your life. So you might as well fucking live your life, be truthful, do what lights you up. That's my motto. And I just love hearing stories like that.
Yeah.
Something that's really amazing about the sexual lighting up process is that it breeds that I don't give a fuck factor. So what I've noticed over the years of doing this work with people is that when they hit a certain stage in their sexual evolution, right, where they're starting to do this work, they're coming into themselves more, they're coming out more, they hit a place where they don't give a shit anymore what people think about that. And that's when I know they've hit that threshold after which they won't go back, right? Like they've hit a certain threshold of the work where that life force energy then is so powerful that it's propelling them forward in their lives. And part of what happens then is they don't care. People's opinions ping off of them or go over their head. They don't even notice, right? Because a big part of this work often for women is like they come into themselves, they become more sexual, more attractive, more radiant, and they get all this male attention. And especially for women who've had issues in the past or violations in the past, a part of them is like this, right? Yeah. They've contracted and they feel like, well, do I contract? Like, what do I do? They go a little bit further in the work and they can deal with it. It's like they've got this energetic force field around them of their own power and their own confidence that repels the negative elements of that, or it goes over their head, right? Like you're so in your own element that it doesn't matter. You don't get bothered by that.
Yeah, I get it. I hear you. Living your truth, you build that internal resilience, and it's just, it does not fucking matter. You know, you can post something and share something and it's like the trolls will come out and it's like, okay, there's a troll. Not like, oh my God, I can't believe I posted that. What's my value as a human? You know, it's just live your life, be you. You're not going to satisfy everyone. Living your truth. I love it. I just love it.
Yeah. And I've something that's coming up for me now also is that like within relationships, the fucks we give most is what our partner's going to approve of between each other. You know what I mean? And this is what's underlying us caring about what everyone else thinks. Like we still, are trying to tiptoe around our partners and all the little boundaries and walls that we've built for ourselves by not being honest and by not taking ownership and by, living within these white lies and these illusory barriers. So there's just so much to be unblocked through this process, I feel.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's where like radical honesty comes in, a commitment. And this is something I talk about in a conscious relationship to radical honesty. Yeah. And I think most of us, we grow up in a world where it's more valued to tell a white lie, right? And not hurt somebody's feelings than to just level out the truth. But my advice to people in that realm is that you can pretty much say anything, it's all in your tone, right? Like if you convey information in a way that's loving and compassionate, you can say anything. But if you're conveying it in a way that's belittling or, you're not really aware of how you're saying it, yeah, it can be more hurtful. I still think the truth is more important than the lie, and I still would be committed to that. But that's the foundation when I'm working with people and building a conscious relationship is the idea of radical honesty. Like we have a commitment to that because we know that without that, we get muddy glass. Right? Like and the muddy glass is going to dilute the power of our connection and the energy power that we are creating and then able to use out in the world. All of that will get diluted. Yeah.
I love it. This has been an incredible conversation. Such a pleasure to share this time with you. And thank you for joining us. You happy to end this one here, bro?
Yeah, I think this is a great place to end. So grateful, Kim, that you spent some time with us and shared your wisdom and your knowledge and your energy. And it's after all these years, it's nice to connect in person, have a real conversation, and hopefully one day our paths will cross in person in real time. Are there any last things you want to leave for our audience? Social media, I mean, I'm sure people know where to find you. We'll list it all in our show notes, but anything you want to share, upcoming courses you have, current courses, etc.
Right. Well, it's been really fun jamming it out with you guys and to speak on different multi-dimensional awareness levels as well without restriction. Again, my Instagram, I post daily content. I put out weekly YouTube videos and or podcasts, my Orgasmic Enlightenment channel, Kim Anami on YouTube. And then I run what I call sexual savant salons, which are online intimacy education programs throughout the year. Vaginal Kung Fu, the hashtag Things I Lived with My Vagina program, coming together for couples, how to be a well-fucked woman, sexual mastery for men, and Sexy Mama, which is a holistic pregnancy and ecstatic birth program, which is another passion of mine. The culmination of the holy fuck, which is an orgasmic birth. So equally important. So those are the behind the paywall where I go deeper with people and can do more in-depth work with them, but plenty of free information out on those other platforms as well.
Cool. Awesome. Kim, thank you so much. To our members, thank you always for your support. We appreciate you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for being here for the truth. Take care.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time, they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean.